Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. In this video I'll explain why Russia can never conquer Ukraine. And I'm one of those at the beginning thought that Russia would take something like a third of Ukraine, thought they'd take Kiev within 2 weeks, get the Dnieper, not be able to cross over it, and so on. But obviously I've revised my view because the Russian army is far more incompetent, dysfunctional than everybody saw. That blitzkrieg failed, and now they're just trying to grind down the Ukrainians by sheer mass, weight of metal and so on. Obviously, but it's not working for various reasons. They can't do any smart maneuvers. Even when they have achieved breakthrough, they're not able to exploit them. They don't have enough armor. Their tanks are very vulnerable to Ukrainian drones. They're hardly even bothering with tanks these days. Most of the modern tanks have been destroyed using T-72s, as in designed in 1972. Not all the T-72s were manufactured that year. They're manufactured for, into the early 80s. Often tanks were in storage for decades in very poor shape, and all true of lots of other assets. So that's why they concentrate on pummeling Ukrainian cities, going for civilian targets like infrastructure to freeze people to submission. Well, it hasn't worked after over 4 years. And fortunately, the winter is almost over. But this is a particularly severe winter and a more testing one. Anyway, so that's why the losses are really horrific for Russia, and they're bad for Ukraine too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is easy for Ukraine, and I don't believe that Ukraine will ever get back Crimea. Might get back some of the other regions, at least in part. So they've lost something, sustained something like 1.3 million casualties. About 28% of that is killed. The Ukrainians rather lower. The Ukrainians something like 400,000 casualties, and about 22% of that was killed. The Ukrainians are a bit better at treating their wounded, which is why sort of more of them survive. So Russia behaving has got this limitless reservoir of manpower, and obviously Russian propaganda is key. Part of their psychological operation is trying to convince Ukrainians they've already lost, resistance is futile, and say to Ukraine's allies, you're simply leveling the playing field by arming Ukraine. You're simply prolonging the agony. Do the Ukrainians a favor, cut off all weapons shipments, and they'll collapse, and that'll save more lives in the long run. Obviously, but that's not a given. The so-called inevitable doesn't always happen. And it's not inevitable. And you can see how Russia's war is stalling. And in 2025, they gained less ground than in any other year. It's slowing down, going forward at the rate of something like 50 meters a day. And you see how many men are killed to gain 50 meters. And I did this at the current rate of advance, to gaining 1% of Ukraine last year. They still have about 80% of it to go. How many casualties, how many dead would they sustain? And I did this because it would take them 80 years at this rate to conquer the whole of Ukraine. That'd be 24 million dead. 24 million. How many military-age males are there in Russia? That's sort of 18 to 45. 25 million. So out of 25 million military-age males, 24 million would be killed. So now, in fairness, sort of like 96%. All right, it gets even worse. There are 25 million military-age males now. In Russia, how many military-age males would there be in 80 years' time? And by even the most optimistic projection, Russia's population is going to fall. So even by the most optimistic one, there'll be 20 million, not 25 million in 80 years' time. Now, okay, 5% of their military are women. They've recruited some foreigners. But anyway, it's just it's unsustainable for them. Now they can sustain it, throughout this year, next year. They say up to 5 years, but they cannot keep this going forever. And Putin has avoided a mass call up. When he did that on a small scale, September, October 2022, he had people bolting from the borders. So the prison recruits, they burned through those. They're suffering something like 45,000 casualties a month and recruiting only about 40,000 people. That's a shortfall of 5,000. Other things is they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. People are previously rejected as permanently medically unfit for military service. Alcoholics, drug addicts, mentally ill people, the mentally subnormal, and so people really old into their 60s and so on. I know Ukraine is men up to 60, some are even over 60 who volunteered to serve. And things like that. And I realize that physique doesn't matter as much as it used to if you're going to be operating drones. But Russia's actually fairly low tech. Yes, it does have drones, but it doesn't have as many as Ukraine proportionally. So that's why they can't keep going. The North Koreans are not sending their troops anymore. And, they've scammed lots of people from South Africa, from Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, Zambia. India, Pakistan, Nepal to join, but people have got wise to that. They know that scam, so they're not coming forward. And Ukraine is actually much less successful in recruiting foreigners because it doesn't lie to them. There is that International Legion for the Territorial Defense of Ukraine, but they're people who know what they're doing, and they're usually military veterans. They usually won't even consider you unless you've got considerable military experience. So that's why Russia can't win at this rate. And you see how it's costing their economy so much. They were paying people these big bonuses, up to tens of thousands of dollars to join. And that was very alluring, particularly in poverty-stricken remote regions of Russia, particularly targeting indigenous ethnic minority, Tuvans and Bashkirs and whatever, Yakut people, Chukchi, people from the Russian Far East, not ethnic Russians, the Slavonic Russians from the Moscow, St. Petersburg area, anywhere like west of the Urals. Now I know there are people who are ethnically Russian who live east of the Urals and so on. So, and then they've cut back the bonuses because they can't afford them. So why would you join, especially knowing that it's a death sentence? That not many of them are going to come back unscathed. If you're not killed, there's a high chance you'll be wounded. Only about 10% of them would avoid ever being wounded or captured, and so on. So that's a big problem for them. They can't keep this going forever, and they don't want to push the Russian public too hard because they're not willing to make those big sacrifices. You compare that to Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a picnic compared to this, and that was the Soviet Union, not Russia. The Soviet Union had over double Russia's current population, and the Soviet government admitted to 14,000 deaths in Afghanistan over 10 years, whereas Russia suffered 300,000 deaths in 4 years of half the population. Now, the 14,000 death toll is almost like a lie, like everything the Soviet government said. It's several times higher than that. Is it 3 times? Is it 5 times? I don't know. But even so, that is much smaller than the current Russian death toll, and proportionally far, far smaller. So, wow, how can they keep this going forever, especially when the oil and gas prices are down, sanctions are tightening? Now, I know they've had a bit of a help from the Middle East situation, and their sanctions evasion is getting more difficult. The Ukrainians are innovating, that the Russians are not. So they only control like 19.2% of Russian territory. So that's why they can't sustain this war economically or demographically forever. They think they'll break Ukraine. So Ukraine's got this indomitable will. The Ukrainian resistors, though, obviously financially backed up by most other Western European countries and places like Japan, South Korea, Canada, the United States. The United States giving far less than it did, but intelligence sharing is quite important. The Ukrainians obviously didn't take it on board when it was flashing red that the invasion was going to come in February 2022. Didn't want to believe it. So what could change the calculus? And Western countries are being very niggardly in not providing more weaponry because they outnumber Russia economically 10-1 and population-wise 3-1. So Poland arming to the teeth. I mean, that's good. But if you give the weapons to Ukraine, you'll never need to use them yourself. They'll kill the Russian army, so you don't have to. And that's it. Because if Russia wins this war, we know that Ukraine won't be the last victim. And if Russia loses this war, it will be. Why would they dare to go for Lithuania and something like that? And that's very important to have foreign, other NATO troops, British, Polish, German, whatever, in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Norway, Poland, the frontline states. There are those other countries which border Ukraine but not Russia, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. Unfortunately, Hungary and Slovakia have been deeply unhelpful about this, demanding that that Ukraine let that oil through the Druzhba pipeline, which is therefore funding the effort to kill Ukrainian civilians. So that's why Russia can't win, but Ukraine is not winning either. Is slowly being pushed back, has to husband its troops. It just doesn't have very many. And the thing that, as I say, could really change the equation are Western countries just stepping up to the plate and giving more assets. You look at Sweden, surrounded by the NATO countries. If I was them, just give half your assets to Ukraine. I mean, you can replace them gradually, but it saves you the cost of even looking after them. And then that's the way that Ukraine can win, to make the war so costly that Russia just can't continue, that they just recognize the losses are so high in troops, they don't really care about the lives of their men. Could they cause a mutiny? Could they cause a military coup? Could they cause more mass immigration? Another, Prigozhin type putsch, like as in June 2023, or what's the other? Putin's not going to be alive forever. What's another possibility is destroying his assets. He doesn't care about the lives of his men and women. He does care about his precious planes, destroying a lot of those. That's why he's been very risk averse with his Air Force. All right. Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon. Today, PayPal, georgecallan7@gmail.com. Goodbye.